Emma had always thought of her home as a safe place. It's okay. It was the little world she and Daniel had built together after 8 years of marriage. Okay. Their Chicago house wasn't large, but it was warm, full of memories, and carried the quiet rhythm of their life morning coffees, late night talks, and laughter that echoed in their kitchen. She loved the familiarity, the stability, and the way Daniel's presence used to calm her heart. But that Friday evening was different. That evening became the first crack in the wall of trust she thought could never break. She was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The soft aroma of roasted chicken filled the air when she heard the front door open. Normally, she would hear Daniel's steady footsteps, his voice calling out, "Emma, I'm home." But this time, there was noise, too much noise. Voices, multiple voices. Deep laughter, heavy footsteps, the sound of several people walking inside. Emma froze with the knife still in her hand, listening carefully. When Daniel appeared in the doorway, he wasn't alone. 5 men followed behind him, strangers Emma had never seen before. Their clothes were worn, their faces tired, but their smiles were quick and loud as if they already belonged there. Daniel, with a strange light in his eyes, said calmly, "Emma, these men needed a place tonight. Couldn't just leave 'em out there." Emma's lips parted, but no words came. She wasn't against kindness. She admired Daniel's generous heart. But this wasn't what she had imagined when she thought of charity. Their home wasn't a shelter, and she didn't know these men. Still, Daniel's voice carried a firmness that made it difficult to argue. She forced a smile, nodded slightly, and stepped aside as they filled the living room with their presence. The men sat comfortably, though they had been invited many times before. They introduced themselves, quickly, names that Emma barely caught. Their laughter bounced against the walls, mixing with the sound of the television Daniel switched on for them. It was as if their living room had transformed into something foreign. Emma returned to the kitchen, her heart unsettled. She tried to focus on dinner, but the sound of Daniel laughing louder than usual drifted in. He was different, brighter, almost boyish, as if he had been waiting for this moment. She leaned against the counter, trying to understand. Why hadn't he called her first? Why hadn't he even asked if she was comfortable? When dinner was ready, she set the table quietly. The strangers ate with eagerness, praising the food, joking with Daniel, and sharing stories that Emma listened to with polite half-smiles. Daniel seemed alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. He leaned in close to them, nodding, listening, and laughing as though these men carried something special that Emma could never provide. Later, when everyone had left and the house was tossed, finally quiet again, Emma looked at Daniel, hoping he would explain. But he simply said they needed help, Emma. That's all. We can't turn our backs on people. His words sounded noble, but his eyes were elsewhere, distant, as though he were protecting something he couldn't yet reveal. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the faint echo of their voices still lingering in her head. Daniel had stayed downstairs longer than usual, cleaning up after them, humming softly to himself. When he finally came to bed, he turned away quickly, falling asleep almost instantly. Emma watched him, her heart heavy. She had married a man she thought she knew inside and out. But that night she realized there were parts of him she had never seen. As the clock ticked past midnight, Emma's unease grew sharper. Something about the evening didn't sit right with her. She tried to convince herself that Daniel was only being kind, that his decision came from compassion. But another part of her, quieter yet stronger, whispered that kindness was not the full story. His laughter had sounded different. His eyes had glowed with something more than generosity. The following morning, Emma tried to push the thoughts away. She prepared breakfast, brewed coffee, and waited for Daniel to join her. He walked in with a smile, kissed her forehead, and sat down as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. But when his phone buzzed on the table and she saw a message from one of the strangers pop up, her stomach turned. Picked up the phone quickly, typing back before she could ask. "They're just checking in," he said casually, almost too quickly. Emma nodded but remained silent. She didn't want to start an argument. She knew Daniel well enough to sense when he was hiding behind half-truths, and this was one of those times. Still, she chose patience. She told herself she would wait, watch, and see what unfolded. Days passed, but the strangers returned again and again. Emma tried to welcome them, serving coffee, offering snacks, and smiling when necessary. But she couldn't ignore how Daniel changed when they were around. His eyes lit up, his shoulders relaxed. His voice carried energy she hadn't heard in years. And though the men were polite to her, it always felt as if she were the outsider, standing at the edge of a circle that belonged only to them and Daniel. One evening, Emma stood by the staircase, watching from above as Daniel and the men filled the living room with chatter. Her husband's laughter echoed through the house, and she realized with a sharp ache in her chest he was happier with them than he was with her. It wasn't just about kindness anymore. Something else was growing in the spaces between his words. Something unspoken but undeniable. She returned to their bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The questions in her heart grew louder. Why these men? Why now? And why did Daniel look at one of them, Mark, the quiet one, with an expression Emma couldn't decipher? That night, when Daniel finally came upstairs, Emma closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. She couldn't bear to face him, not when her heart was filled with such heavy doubt. As he slipped into bed beside her, she felt the distance more than ever. He was close physically, but far away in spirit, and in the silence of that long night, Emma's mind replayed the scene of him walking in with 5 strangers as though it were the most natural thing in the world. It was the beginning of something she didn't yet understand, but deep down, she knew it was the beginning of change, the kind that would alter everything she believed about her husband, her marriage, and the home they had built together. The days after the strangers first arrived carried a weight Emma could not shake. She tried to focus on her daily routine's work, errands, keeping the house in order, but everywhere she turned, there was a reminder of that night. Daniel's jacket still smelled faintly of smoke from when they had sat outside talking. His phone buzzed with new messages more often than before. And every time it did, Emma felt the quiet pull of doubt inside her chest. It didn't take long for the strangers to return. What was supposed to be one evening of kindness slowly grew into a habit. Sometimes 2 of them showed up, sometimes all 5. They didn't always stay long, but it was enough to change the atmosphere of the home. Emma noticed how quickly Daniel welcomed them in, how eagerly he listened to their stories. He poured them drinks, ordered takeout, and made sure they felt at home, as though they were family rather than people they had met on the street. Emma tried to be gracious. She smiled when they greeted her, offered snacks, and asked polite questions. But her mind was always elsewhere, observing, searching for something hidden in the way Daniel interacted with them. And soon, she began to notice it in his eyes. It wasn't just that Daniel enjoyed their company. It was the way his attention shifted whenever one of them spoke. Mark, he was the quietest of the group. A man who didn't say much but carried a calm presence that seemed to steady the room. Mark had sharp features softened by kind eyes, and while the others joked loudly, Mark listened more than he talked. Emma watched Daniel carefully. Whenever Mark said something, Daniel leaned forward, his smile a little wider, his voice warmer. His laughter came quicker, almost eager, as though he wanted to impress him. It was a subtle shift, but Emma felt it in her bones, an invisible thread connecting her husband to this stranger. One evening, Emma finally found the courage to bring it up. After the men had left, she sat across from Daniel at the dining table. Her voice was calm, but her heart raced. "Daniel, why are they here so often? Why him especially?" "I can't help noticing the way you look at Mark." Daniel froze for a moment, then laughed it off. "Emma, don't be ridiculous. They've had a hard life and they just need someone to give them a chance. That's all it is. You're reading too much into it." But Emma knew Daniel well. His laugh was forced and his eyes avoided hers. The man who once told her everything now spoke with guarded words. That distance hurt more than anything. The following week, the visits continued. Emma stood by quietly as Daniel grew more invested in their company. She tried to busy herself with chores, reading, even calling friends. But the sound of his laughter downstairs always reached her ears. It wasn't just laughter, it was something freer, lighter, as if he had found a part of himself he didn't share with her anymore. One evening, she came down the stairs unexpectedly and paused in the hallway. Daniel and Mark were sitting close on the couch, talking in low voices while the others watched television. Daniel's body leaned toward Mark, his eyes locked on him as though no one else existed in the room. Emma's stomach tightened. She wanted to walk in, to interrupt, to reclaim the man who was supposed to be hers. But instead, she quietly turned away, her chest heavy with unspoken words. Later that night, Emma lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. She remembered the man Daniel used to be, the way he would tell her about his day in detail. The way his laughter used to belong only to her. Now he came to bed distracted, his phone buzzing with messages he never shared, mind far away even as he lay beside her. The following morning, Emma tried again to reach him. She made his favorite breakfast pancakes with blueberries and placed the plate in front of him with a hopeful smile. "Daniel," she began softly, "I miss us. I feel like you're slipping away. Can we talk?" He looked at her, his fork pausing midair, and for a brief moment she saw the man she once knew in his eyes. But then he sighed and shook his head. "Emma, nothing's wrong. You're imagining things. I just want to help people. Isn't that something we both believe in?" His words were gentle, but they landed like a wall between them. Emma nodded, but inside she felt more alone than ever. The next time the men visited, Emma decided to observe quietly. She stayed in the kitchen, pretending to read while her ears caught every word. The more she listened, the clearer it became. Daniel wasn't just being kind. He was searching for something: connection, validation, maybe even admiration. And Mark gave it to him. When the night ended and the men finally left, Emma stood by the window, watching them walk down the street. Mark turned back briefly, and in that fleeting glance, Emma saw something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't gratitude for food or shelter, it was familiarity. As though he shared a secret with Daniel that she wasn't meant to know. Her hands trembled against the curtain. She whispered to herself, "What are you hiding, Daniel?" The words hung heavy in the room, unanswered. Over the next days, Emma carried the weight of suspicion silently. She didn't confront Daniel again, not yet. She needed proof, something more than the hollow excuses he offered. She began paying closer attention, noticing every detail: how often his phone lit up, how quickly he stepped away to answer, how his mood brightened whenever the strangers were around. The distance between them grew. Their conversations became shorter, filled with surface-level words that meant nothing. Emma felt like a guest in her own marriage, watching as Daniel poured his time and energy into people she barely knew. The man she had trusted with her whole heart was changing before her eyes, and she couldn't stop it. One rainy evening, Emma walked into the living room as Daniel spoke with Mark near the doorway. Their voices were low, but she caught a glimpse of Daniel's expression: soft, almost vulnerable, the kind of look he hadn't given her in years. Mark placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, saying something Emma couldn't hear. Daniel nodded slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile that broke her heart. She quickly stepped back before they noticed her, retreating into the kitchen with her pulse racing. That image stayed with her all night. The way Daniel had looked at Mark, the way his body leaned toward him, the way silence carried more meaning than words. Emma lay in bed, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. She didn't know the full truth yet, but she knew enough to feel the ground shifting beneath her. Daniel was no longer fully hers. Something unspoken tied him to Mark, and until he admitted it, she was left to carry the unbearable weight of suspicion. As dawn approached, Emma whispered into the quiet room, "Please, God, let me be wrong." But in her heart, she feared she wasn't. The rain came down hard that night, drumming against the roof in an endless rhythm. Emma sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with silence broken only by the storm outside. Daniel had stayed downstairs after dinner, saying he wanted to clean up and make sure everything was in order. Normally, Emma would have joined him, but lately she found herself avoiding his company. The distance between them had grown too wide, and every conversation left her with more questions than answers. Hours passed. Midnight slipped into 1 o'clock, and still she heard movement downstairs. At first she thought Daniel was just restless, but then a low voice drifted upward, his voice speaking softly. Curious and uneasy, she slipped out of bed, wrapped her robe tightly around her, and tiptoed down the stairs. The closer she came, the clearer the voices grew. Daniel wasn't alone. Someone else was with him. Emma slowed her steps, her heart pounding as she reached the hallway. The kitchen light was on, spilling faint golden beams across the floor. She stopped just before the doorway, pressing her hand against the wall as if to steady herself. Then she heard it words that would stay with her. "Forever." "Don't worry," Mark's voice said, low but firm. "She won't find out. You just have to decide what you really want." Emma's breath caught. Her hand flew to her mouth to keep from gasping out loud. She leaned closer, trembling as she listened. Daniel's reply was muffled at first, but then she caught fragments. "It's complicated. I didn't plan this. I just feel alive again." His voice cracked on the last word. Raw and filled with something Emma had never heard from him before. Alive again. The phrase echoed in her mind, louder than the storm outside. Emma's knees nearly gave way beneath her. She pressed her back against the wall, staring into the empty hallway as though the words had painted it with betrayal. Mark spoke again, softer now. "You don't need to explain it. You just need to choose. Hiding won't work forever." Emma's chest tightened. The glass of water she had intended to fetch no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except the fact that her husband was sharing secrets with another stranger he had brought into their home. For a moment, she considered walking in, confronting them right there in the kitchen. She wanted to demand answers, to force Daniel to look her in the eye and admit what he had done. But her body refused to move. Her heart was too fragile, her spirit too shaken. Instead, she stood frozen, tears threatening to spill as she realized she was hearing the sound of her marriage cracking apart. She crept back upstairs as quietly as she could, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the bedroom, she closed the door softly and leaned against it, her chest heaving with silent sobs. She buried her face in her hands, wishing she could erase what she had just heard. But no amount of denial could change the truth. Daniel returned to bed later, long after the voices had stopped. Emma kept her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. She felt the mattress shift under his weight, heard him sigh deeply, and sensed the restless thoughts racing through his mind. She wanted to turn to him, to ask, to scream, to beg. But instead, she stayed still, her body tense, her heart breaking in silence. The next morning the storm had passed, but Emma carried her own storm inside her. She moved through the day mechanically making coffee, folding laundry, answering emails, but her mind never stopped replaying the night before. Every word she had overheard cut into her like a blade. Alive again. What did that mean? Was Daniel saying he hadn't felt alive with her anymore? Was he telling Mark that she, his wife of 8 years, wasn't enough? Emma wanted to deny it, to convince herself she had misunderstood. But the tone in Daniel's voice had been too real, too heavy with confession. She tried to watch him as he moved through the morning. He smiled, spoke casually, even kissed her cheek before leaving for work. But to Emma, everything looked different now. His smile felt like a mask. His kiss felt hollow. His eyes, once warm and familiar, seemed distant and clouded. The rest of the day was a blur. Emma tried to distract herself with housework, but the whispers in her memory haunted her. She kept asking herself the same questions over and over. Was this betrayal? Or was it something else, something even deeper? Was she losing Daniel completely? By evening, she couldn't hold her tears back any longer. She sat on the couch with her knees pulled up to her chest, crying quietly into the soft fabric of her sweater. She thought about all the years she had given him, the love, the trust, the sacrifices. And now one whisper in the kitchen had undone it all. That night, when Daniel returned, Emma watched him with new eyes. She noticed the way he checked his phone the moment he set his keys down. She saw how his expression brightened when a message came through, how quickly his fingers typed a reply. He didn't look at her the same way anymore, and the realization hollowed her out. They ate dinner in near silence. Daniel spoke about work, about errands he needed to run, about things that didn't matter. Emma nodded, smiled weakly, and said little. Inside, she was screaming for the truth when he went to bed. Emma stayed in the living room, staring at the clock as it ticked past midnight. The shadows in the house felt colder, heavier. She wrapped a blanket around herself and whispered into the quiet, "What happened to us, Daniel? Where did I lose you?" The only answer was the sound of her own voice breaking. Morning light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, but Emma felt none of its warmth. She had barely slept. The words she had overheard in the kitchen still echoed in her mind, sharper than any blade. "She won't find out. I just feel alive again." No matter how many times she replayed them, the meaning didn't change. Something had happened between Daniel and Mark, and no amount of denial could erase it. For days, Emma carried the weight in silence. She smiled when Daniel looked at her, cooked meals, went through the motions of a routine, but inside she was crumbling. Each laugh he shared with Mark, each secretive text, each distracted glance chipped away at the woman she once was. She told herself she would wait for the right moment to confront him. She wanted to choose her words carefully, to demand the truth without breaking herself apart. The moment came one evening when the strangers had finally stopped visiting for a few days. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, as Emma and Daniel sat across from each other at the dining table. The food lay untouched between them. Emma's fork hovered over her plate, but her stomach was tied in knots. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. "Daniel," she began softly, her voice steady though her hands trembled under the table. "We need to talk. Really talk. No more pretending." Daniel looked up, his expression guarded. "What do you mean?" Emma drew in a sharp breath, her chest tightening. "I heard you that night. You and Mark in the kitchen. You said you felt alive again. You said I wouldn't find out. Don't lie to me, Daniel, please. I deserve the truth." The color drained from his face. His fork clattered against the plate as his hand slipped. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stared at her, his lips pressed tightly together, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Finally, he whispered, "Emma." But his voice broke before he could continue. Tears stung Emma's eyes, but she forced herself to stay strong. "Don't say my name like that. Say the truth. Whatever it is, I can take it." Daniel buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with guilt. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. But I can't keep lying. You're right, I've been hiding something." Emma's heart pounded. She gripped the edge of the table, bracing herself. "Then say it." Daniel exhaled slowly, as though releasing a burden he had carried for too long. "When I met Mark, something inside me woke up. Something I thought I had lost years ago. It wasn't supposed to happen, Emma. I didn't go looking for it. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized how empty I'd been. He made me feel alive again." The words cut through Emma like a storm tearing through glass. She stared at him, stunned, her chest hollow. "Alive again. And what was I, Daniel? What was our marriage? 8 years of my life, was that not enough to keep you alive?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "It's not about you. You've been everything to me, Emma, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I didn't even realize it until I met him. I tried to fight it. I wanted to believe I could just walk away, but I couldn't. I'm so sorry." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She felt betrayed, abandoned, and invisible all at once. "You brought him into our home. Into my home. Do you understand what you've done to me?" "To us," Daniel's voice cracked. "I thought if I kept it close, maybe I could control it. Maybe it wouldn't grow into something more. But it did. And now I don't know how to fix it." Emma stood, pushing her chair back sharply. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. "You can't fix this. Do you understand? You broke something that can't be fixed. Trust doesn't come back once it's gone. And you've shattered mine. Daniel rose too, reaching for her, but she stepped away. Emma, please. I still love you. You're my wife. I never wanted to lose you. She shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. Love doesn't survive betrayal, Daniel. Not like this. You didn't just break a promise, you broke me. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Daniel lowered his hand, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. It's a man undone by his own choices. Emma turned toward the window, staring out at the dark street beyond. Her chest ached, but her decision grew clear with every passing second. She couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. She couldn't spend her life wondering if she would ever be enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost eerily so. You've made your choice, Daniel. Now I have to make mine. Daniel's lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. He simply sank back into his chair. Defeated. Emma walked upstairs, her feet heavy, her body trembling. She entered their bedroom, the room that once felt like safety, and began pulling out a suitcase. Every fold of clothing, every item she packed, felt like a piece of her heart breaking. But she knew she couldn't stay. Not anymore. As she zipped the bag shut, she paused, glancing around the room one last time. Memories flashed, laughing under the covers, late-night talks, promises whispered in the dark. All of it felt like someone else's life now, distant and untouchable. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes red. Emma, don't go. Please, we can figure this out. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes. Emma lifted the suitcase and shook her head. It's too late, Daniel. You should have thought of that before you let him take my place in your heart. She walked past him, down the stairs and toward the door. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, cool and sharp. A painful reminder that she was stepping into a future she hadn't planned for. But at least it was a future where she could begin again. Behind her, she heard Daniel's voice break into the night. Emma, I'm sorry. She paused for a moment, her hand tightening around the handle of her suitcase. But she didn't turn back. She'll see OULDN single quotes to say. With a deep breath, Emma walked away from the home that no longer felt like hers. Tears blurred her vision, but in her chest, beneath the heartbreak, there was a flicker of strength. She didn't know where the road ahead would take her, but she knew one thing with certainty. Once trust is broken, love can never return untouched. And as she disappeared into the night, Emma whispered to herself, I will survive this. Even if he couldn't choose me, I will choose myself.